We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, hello and welcome out there in podcast land. This is Trevor, the Iron Fist. This is a podcast, the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. Over there on the screen is Joe, the tech guy. How are you, Joe?
I'm good. Evening all.
And somewhere trapped in a bad internet connection is Cameron Leckie, who is our guest for tonight. And we were chatting to him and it was all going very well for about 10 minutes there. And just prior to pressing the button to go live, Cameron's video froze and we couldn't hear him, and he's madly scrambling around in the background, fusing wires together and pedaling on a bicycle to upgrade his internet connection. So we're going to just sort of fill in a little bit because, to be honest, the podcast was about Cameron, who is running in the Senate for Australia's Voice. And so we're going to ask him what's all that about. Sort of similar to what we did last week with the Socialist Equality Party. So if I seem a little bit unprepared and a little bit out of sorts, it's because we're winging it a little bit while we're waiting to see if Cameron is going to come back and join us, or if Joe and I are going to bumble along with a few bits and pieces of different things. So if you're in the chat, say hello and we will incorporate your comments. So I will put the chat up so I can see it. And yeah, if you're able to join us and make comments, feel free to do so. Looks like I hear a beep in the background, which might be Cameron joining us, and we'll see if his internet's working or not. Lucky Joe's here. So yeah, Australia's Voice Party is actually it's the one started by Fatima Payman, who was the former Labor, still a senator. Was a Labor senator, and she has left and started her own party. So Cameron's there and sorting things out. I'll try not to be distracted by that. Things we could talk about in the meantime, Joe.
Yeah.
In recent news, the Pope died.
What a shock.
Yeah.
And wasn't like he was in and out of hospital for the last month.
Yes. You know, I was watching interviews with people and they talk about how shocked they were that he died. And it's like, well, how can you be shocked? This was an old man.
With congestive heart failure, apparently.
Yes. And unfortunately had just met J.D. Vance.
Yes.
That alone could knock over a healthy person. So
apparently he gave up the will to live after that.
That's right. You sent me an article titled "The Pope Loses Will to Live After Meeting J.D. Vance." Yes. This is from News Thump, which I guess is like the Onion or the Chaser or the.
I assume so. Yes.
Yeah, one of those. And the article said, the Pope has died a few hours after meeting J.D. Vance, with Vatican officials saying the Pope lost the will to live after a brief meeting with the Vice President. After a brief audience, the Pope was heard to mutter, "Christ, we're all doomed, absolutely doomed," before adding, "What's the bloody point?" Yeah, that'll do it to you.
There's also been a meme going around of, I don't know if you know the game Bang, Marry, Kill.
No.
So you're given 3 names and you have to pick which one you'd bang, which one you'd marry, and which one you'd kill.
Oh, yeah.
And
okay.
It was the J.D. Vance one. So there was the couch for who he'd bang, then there's his wife, and then there's the Pope for who he'd kill.
Right. Yeah, I saw it, like Donald Trump had a tweet saying, you know, that he and Melania are going to go to the funeral service, and that he was looking forward, and that he was looking forward to it. I wonder if he was even invited. Maybe that was a way of making.
Not.
Yes, that's probably a way of ensuring that he got invited. So, yeah. Old Noisy is in the chat room. Good on you, Old Noisy. So Cameron's still connecting wires. You know, if it doesn't work out, we'll just do it again another night soon, because there's not long to go to the election. Joe, we're in a position with this election that the the coalition opposition are still yet to release policies about certain things and costings and things, and they keep saying we'll release it all in good time, and people are voting, so they're leaving their run late, I think. So now that's looking promising. I can see Cameron there, and I can see obvious movement. So maybe and I can actually hear Cameron. You're loud and clear. Terrific.
Sorry about that, gents. Everything is fine. Then all of a sudden it decided to shut itself down. So technology, eh?
Yeah. You're on a standard broadband connection of some sort there, are you?
Yeah.
Right.
We've got, what do you call it, NBN.
Yes.
Box is right next to me, so we should be all right.
Okay. All right. Fingers crossed. If there's a major problem, Cameron, we'll just do it another night. What the heck? So we'll do the best we can. So we briefly mentioned that the paper died and that the opposition are yet to release policies and costings with people still starting to vote. But anyway, let's talk about your situation with Australia's Voice, and you've decided to be a candidate, and you're standing in Queensland, and you're second on the ticket for Australia's Voice. So we interviewed you about 9 months ago because you and I agree a lot on foreign policy, defence, the ridiculousness of AUKUS, our relationship with the United States, how the empire is crumbling, and a whole bunch of things. So we're of the same mind on those things.
I think
and
we are, yes.
That's your sort of forte, if you like. Obviously, Australia's Voice has got other policies that we might get to about housing and bank reform and other things. But why don't you kick off and tell us, who you are and how it came about that you got invited or you asked to be part of the party, and just a bit of a sort of a elevator pitch as to why the hell you're doing this, Cameron.
Yeah, sure. Good question. I asked myself that as well. I guess very quickly on myself. So, I'm a Victorian originally. Joined the Army when I was 17, straight out of high school. Went to the Australian Defence Force Academy in Duntroon, so graduated as an officer. 24 years later, decided it's time to do something different. So I ended my military career as a major, did 3 deployments, so one to East Timor, one to the Solomon Islands, and I went to Sumatra after the tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. And I'm a bit of a slow learner. It took me, I don't know, at least half my military career to start questioning why we're doing the things we're doing. And then, by the end of my military career, I was just sort of thinking, why are we doing the things we're doing? I think we're going against our national self-interest. Our alliance with the United States is actually detrimental to both our security and prosperity. So I got to the point where I think I need to leave the military. So I finished off an agricultural engineering degree, which I got a university medal for, and found myself doing a PhD in soil science, and now work as a soil scientist and that's my profession. So that's my, background in a minute or two. As to, Trevor, I write quite extensively. I sort of write as a bit of a stress relief. So when something bugs me about the world, which happens reasonably regularly, I tend to write. And part of that's, to, vent my frustrations. Also part of it's to help, a bit like what you do with this podcast, to help me understand the world better. Because I think the more we read, the more we research, the more we think. And I think writing's very good at helping you to articulate exactly what you think. And much of what I write about is obviously Australia's defence policy and things we're doing in the world, and think how we could approach things differently. So, and I guess through that, reasonably active on Twitter in particular. You make connections, you meet people, you get opportunities. So through my writing, I became involved with the Independent Peaceful Australia Network. I made some submissions to their People's Inquiry into the US Alliance, and I also on the member.
Sorry, who's that group? What's it called again? Independent what?
IPAN. So it's a national group. It's Independent and Peaceful Australia Network. So it's basically an organisation of people who want us to be independent and peaceful in the world. And so they've done some quite good work looking at things like the Forced Posture Agreement, which we might talk about later, and the Alliance and AUKUS and things like that.
Yep.
Things that don't sort of tend to get discussed in the amongst the duopoly and in our sort of mainstream political debate. And also Australians for War Powers Reform. And that's an organisation who argues that, which I firmly believe, that we should have the Parliament vote on the decision to go to war, as in an overseas war, not with regards to defending ourselves, rather than just having it at the whim of the Prime Minister or the executive government. I think that as the most important decision the government can make, it's sort of in a democracy, it should be a democratic decision. So, got involved in those organisations, and then I guess where all this Australia's Voice started from was I did a speech last Palm Sunday, in King George Square in Brisbane, and basically, spoke about AUKUS and what a bad deal it was and why we should get out of it. And from that, a couple of people came up to me afterwards, and one of them was Michelle McDonald, who's a journalist who works in the communications manager for the Anglican Diocese in Brisbane, or Southeast Queensland. So we had a bit of a chat and a few conversations. So that's sort of where this Australia's Voice started from, because earlier this year, as Australia's Voice sort of only formed late last year, and are looking for candidates. And Michelle gave me a call. We had a few chats, and I had a chat to Senator Payman, and did an interview with them. And I think our values align, and what we're sort of arguing for align. And when I got the opportunity to be on that Senate ticket, I thought, well, put your money where your mouth is, and here I am.
Yep. So last week we had the Socialist Equality Party on, and they had the difficulty where they needed 1,500 members in order to be a registered party, and they had problems with that with the Electoral Commission. And when you said you were running, and I looked and I thought, Australia's Voice, who are they? And then I saw that it was the party created by Fatima Payman. And basically the system, dear listener, works like this, that if an existing sitting member of Parliament forms a party, then as I understand it, you don't need that 1,500 member requirement. The fact that you've just got somebody in the Parliament gets you across the line for registration as a political party. So does that all sound correct to you, or you never thought about it too much?
I couldn't actually answer that.
Right. Fair enough. That's just my understanding.
I'm not sure on the numbers, but I know. I think it was October, November when they actually got registered. So, but the mechanics of all that, I wasn't involved with. So, but it's obviously, we're on the Senate ticket in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and Western Australia. So the Australian Electoral Commission's obviously given us the thumbs up that we're a legitimate party, and people can vote for us.
Now, some people might be under the impression that the Fatima Payman party, let's call it that, or the Australia Voice being associated with her, that she was out to create some sort of Muslim party or something like that, Islamic party. So what do you say to that? Is that true? Well, and what's the story with the religious sort of element of this party?
I'm an atheist, so that gives you a bit of a hint. So obviously, Senator Payman is a Muslim, and their members of the party are Muslim, and I think we have a reasonable amount of support in the Islamic community. So, for example, Muslim Votes Matter has endorsed our lead candidate, Michelle McDonald, in Queensland as their sort of Queensland candidate. So yes, we have support in the Islamic community, and that's great. But it's a party for all Australians. So there's the three candidates in Queensland. We've got Christians, myself as a atheist, and I mean, I'm a soil scientist, and how do you grow a healthy garden? We have lots of diversity, and I think what we need at this point in Australia's sort of political development is we need more diversity. People representing us. When you get a group of people together from different backgrounds, different contexts, different experiences, whether that's where they come from, religion, education, whatever it is, that's when you get better outcomes. So I guess, and I think that's the strength of Australia's voice, is that it's a party with all Australians can sort of be a member of. It's not linked to, it's not a Muslim party.
Yep. Just as further background for people who aren't aware, Fatima was a member of the Labor Party, and basically crossed the floor over the issue of Palestine and Gaza, where she was seeking, roughly speaking,
recognition.
Recognition of Palestine, and that's why she then left the Labor Party and joined, started eventually her own party. So I think, we'll get into talking about the policies and things in a moment. I guess the very first question I have in my mind is, why not say the Greens, for example? I'm looking at a lot of the policies, and we'll talk about them, but I think she crossed the floor to join a motion that the Greens had about Palestine. So any major differences, or can you talk to that?
Well, the way Senator Payman puts it is that Australia's voice is sort of situated between the Greens and Labor. So I think, Labor's moved more right over time, and, arguably doesn't particularly represent workers anymore, or to the extent that they used to. And the Greens are obviously, big on environmental issues and social issues, whereas Australia's voice, I think, is aiming, the average Australian, the working Australian. So I think that's where we fit into that spectrum. And yes, I guess in my view, the vote we're competing for is, we're trying to get the Liberals. We're not really competing with the Greens. We're trying to get not the Liberals, those Labor voters who are disaffected with Labor, and I think there's quite a proportion of them now, and also young people who the way the economy is, and that is not really working to their benefit at the moment. So I think that's the sort of demographic that we're looking at, and also people who, personally myself, I hadn't heard of Senator Payman. I was Western Australian senator until she crossed the floor. But all the rights and wrongs, and October 7th, Hamas, blah blah blah, all that, but that's no excuse, in my view, for a genocide. And I think, I have no doubt in my mind that that's what's occurring. We have the Genocide Convention. Australians signed up to that. We have responsibilities under that, which the current government's not meeting. And if the Liberal Party was in power, I doubt they'd be meeting as well. That doesn't sit well with me. So I think that people are disaffected with the direction of our two main parties, which really I call them a duopoly, because I think there's not really that much difference between the two on the key issues.
Yep.
I think there's also a proportion of the population who, here's an alternative that you can vote for, who we're unequivocal on that position that there's a genocide occurring in Palestine, and that needs to stop. And Australia needs to stop being complicit in it.
Yeah, sort of Labor seems to talk with pride about being in lockstep with the Liberals over foreign, defence and foreign policy, as if this is a good thing, and it's a terrible choice.
Well, yeah. So I guess this is another reason why I'm running, is I'm a scientist, engineer, that, so I'm thinking in systems, thinking terms of evolution, and the really the last 400 or 500 years, whenever we want to start, of the Western world being dominant in the global system, I think that's coming to an end. Arguably, you could make an argument it has already ended, and that's not the end of the world. I actually think it's a great opportunity for Australia, given where we're located in the world and what we can offer the rest of the world. But the Liberal and Labor parties, they've developed their power base and evolved over time in that context of a Western-dominated world, particularly since the end of the last 30-odd years, since the end of the Cold War, and the unipolar moment when the United States was the dominant world power. That world's coming to an end. But what quite happened, there's a great great book, a bit of a heavy read called On the Psychology of Military Incompetence. One of the quotes in that is that, the more events proved people wrong, the firmer their beliefs, the stronger their beliefs in their sort of existing preconceptions became. I butchered that quote, but basically the idea is that the world's changing around them, but they couldn't adapt with that, so they just doubled down on what they originally thought. And to me, that's what's happening with the Liberal and Labor parties. They're clinging fingertips to the existing system because that's what they're comfortable with. That's what got them in power. That's what maintains their power, even though that's dissolving. Literally as we speak, as look at Trump and sanctions and where the US is heading. And so, from a evolutionary perspective, what's going to happen? There's going to be these sprouts in somewhere coming elsewhere, and that's going to replace the existing system. So I think that's what we need. We need alternatives. They're not going to come from the core. We need different levels of the levels of thinking that created the problems we have now aren't going to fix it. We need new levels of thinking, new alternative views, new ideas, and from that, hopefully we'll come to a better way of managing our relationship with the rest of the world and getting along, as opposed to the direction we're currently heading.
You and I hang out in a bubble where basically everybody recognises that AUKUS is the most ridiculous harebrained scheme that was ever dreamt up.
Yeah.
And it's clear that America's not going to save us from anything. It's just going to drag us into wars like it always has. And there's no denying the rise of China, and it's our best customer, and that normally you try and improve your relationships with important customers. So we're in a world where we see things completely differently. Like I say to people, China's not the threat that it's made out to be. It doesn't have a history of invading countries. If they want the stuff from us, it's just so much easier for them to buy it. Like, it's just so much easier. And it's really difficult to send a force across an ocean and start taking things forcibly. But if you sit in a coffee shop and talk with people in this way, they will think you're nuts, you're a commie, you're completely a lunatic, you're a clown. You're like, people are so indoctrinated into thinking that, well, China bad, America good, and Israel justified, and all these things because of them. I'm thinking boomers in particular here, Cameron. They're just indoctrinated by a mainstream media that is forcing that onto them, and I get, I see it all the time. For my sins, I subscribe to the Courier Mail just so I can see what nonsense they're producing. I read it as if it's an LMP newsletter propaganda sheet, which is what it is, with a bit of sport and weather thrown in. And but what really gets me sometimes, Cameron, and I think you get this, is the ABC following a lot of the lead of the Murdoch press and repeating a lot of the nonsense when you would think they're not under the same pressures to do so. But so many of the journalists fail to provide the context of these conflicts and parrot the same nonsense. So I've seen it in your posts and things. Your thoughts on the ABC's role in this indoctrination process?
Yeah. Yes, well, if you look at my Twitter feed, I regularly dissect ABC articles. I think the ABC is a very important, this is why I'm so critical of the ABC, because I think they're a crucial part of our national sort of infrastructure. Like, we need that government-funded way of, being able to disseminate information. And if they did that in accordance with their charter, etc., I think we need that, and I support that. But the way the ABC is, it's reporting on pretty much anything to do with, my main focus is foreign affairs, so I'll stick to that. But it is, I don't know, woeful might be too strong a word, but it's getting towards that end. And the way they do it in the main is what, it's a US journalist called Patrick Lawrence, who's brilliant. Consortium News, if you're if you want to follow him, he publishes there, and I think he's got a Substack as well. But he's brilliant. But he calls it the power of leaving out. So it's what you were talking about before. It's leaving out that context, the historical reasoning, the timelines, and they do it over and over again. And it's also the subtleties. So in language. So, for example, in the Hamas had hostages it took, and Israel has also got a lot of Palestinians, and with the subtle language. So when they did the exchanges, the ABC called them the Israeli hostages, even though most of them were actually military members of the Israeli Defense Force, versus Palestinian prisoners. So it's just giving that little slant of legitimacy to the Israeli hostages. And
prisoners who'd never been charged with anything, had never faced a court of law, and we're essentially hostages.
Exactly. So it's those little slants, and and for the average reader who's just glossing over. And I mean, because I know the areas that I focus on, I think I have a reasonably good grip of what's going on, and I apply that same template to every other story I read. And you think, I'm always thinking, what's the angle, and that, because it's never, it's narrative management. That's what the ABC has become. It's managing a narrative, and that narrative may or may not, more often not, have much relationship to the actual cause of events or what's happening in the world, but it's there to make us think a certain way, so that it can support the government policies. Where that's coming from, I don't know. Is that internal to the ABC? Is it the management? Is it government diktat? I don't know, but it's doing Australia a major disservice. And a practical example of this is what's happened in the last couple of weeks with Indonesia. And the Russian, the Russians going to have a military air base, or use Indonesian air bases and that. So big hoo-ha, and storm in a teacup as far as I'm concerned, because you just have to look at Indonesia's foreign policy, and there's no way on earth they're going to let a foreign power, unlike us, have a military base, permanent military base on their soil. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought where I was going. Oh, sorry. But what's Indonesia just joined? BRICS.
Yes.
They joined BRICS as a full member last year. And there is no mention whatsoever in virtually any Australian media on the fact, including the ABC, that Indonesia has joined BRICS. Yeah. And as has Thailand and Malaysia as partner countries. Vietnam's looking at joining now, and just in the last couple of weeks there's been noise about that. And it's like, we don't even get, it's not even mentioned. Like this is like, this is an enormous change in trading relationships and diplomatic relationships and that, and we just head in the sand, ignoring it as if it's irrelevant.
It doesn't get any media play at all. I've spoken with friends who are well informed about things, doctors who keep an eye on politics and stuff, and I say, what do you think about BRICS? And they go, what's that? I have no idea.
That's right. BRICS is now bigger than the G7. Yes. And it's growing bigger. So each year it's going to get bigger. The G7's become less influential, less powerful.
Yes.
And, my way of thinking, that's an enormous opportunity.
Yes.
John Menadue, I put on Twitter today, he had one of the little graphics I did for an article, and it had, flags over all the countries, with Australia heading north, and, it had all the flags, India, China, all the Asian countries in between. And I think, and we're at the base of that, and it's like, this is the future. As Kishore Mahbubani, this, well-known Singaporean diplomat, writes, you've got a little book, it's freely available, The Asian 21st Century. We're living in the Asian 21st century, and we're, at the bottom end of Asia. We've got all these resources and things that we can trade and benefit from, yet we've got our head in the sand, ignoring the elephant in the room, and I think that's going to be to our great detriment if we don't sort of wake up pretty damn quick.
Yeah, it's a cultural ignorance as well, I think, in that we've been just force-fed this. America, basically indoctrinates everybody that they go around the world protecting democracy. It used to be capitalism, but you sort of look at the Chinese system now, and it's it's got a lot of capitalist elements to it. So they talk about, protecting freedom and democracy. And really, you've just got to stop with people and say, look, just because we in the West are used to a certain system now of predominantly two-party elections and our voting system, that we just arrogantly think that that's the best way of running a country, and that's democracy that reflects the will of the people, and anything else than that is so inferior, and the poor people who live under it are under authoritarian regimes. And it just totally ignores the culture of different cultures, and people operate in different ways. And the proof is in the pudding in China, like the way they've lifted so many people out of poverty and improved the living standards of so many people that that whatever label you want to call the system that they've been operating under, it's been pretty damn effective. And when they poll people in China, Western-backed groups poll them in situations where they know they're getting honest answers. There's enormous satisfaction from the local population there. So we've got to grow up in this country and recognise that Asia has and China in particular, a collective mentality that we don't, and maybe we should start adopting some of this whole sort of freedom of the individual, forgetting about the responsibility to the collective group. We've got stuff we can learn from these people, but we're so arrogant that we dismiss them as primitive.
Arrogant, hubristic, pride comes before the fall. And another reason why I'm running is because in the army we used to use this term, like admire a problem. Rather than fixing it, you admire the problem. We do a lot of that in Australia. And our politics, it's all about the big announcement, the glossy brochures, the 24-hour news cycle or whatever. But we're not particularly good at actually fixing issues. So when you never fix issues, of course, they keep popping up over time. They get bigger, they get worse. Whereas you look at China, and I'm not saying China's perfect by any means, like any country's got problems and issues and all that sort of stuff. But from what I can tell, they fix problems. They come up with plans, they put the resources towards it. It's largely done by consensus from what I can understand of their political system. So we call it a rubber stamp, but that's because we don't understand, Chinese culture and how they build consensus. And I was very fortunate last year. I actually went to China for a week.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that to do with soil sort of stuff.
Yeah. So in my employment, I got a study exchange, and this is like one thing I will give the government a pat on the back. I can't remember the exact name, but it's Australian government funded program, Australia, China. Sorry, I can't remember the name, but there's a foundation basically to help improve Australian-China relations. They put out grants. And I was fortunate to go with my university to China. I went to Lanzhou and Yangling, which is on the Yellow River. And Lanzhou is a third-tier Chinese city. And oh my goodness, if that's a third-tier city, I would hate to see a first tier. I mean, you can still see there's areas for development. It's not all wealthy in that, but
the infrastructure is incredible.
The infrastructure is being built. The efforts they're putting in, and like for example, I think on Australia, there's a paper put out not long ago about the Australian agricultural workforce. I think it was a year or two ago, and saying, agriculture might be without a workforce if we don't do something to fix, the number of graduates who are coming through to fill agricultural positions. And we went to one university from one province in China, and I think every province in China has an agricultural focused university, and they graduate 15,000 students a year.
Wow.
So when you've had, and I was just looking just before we came out, there's a thing on the leading IQ, countries leading IQ in the world, and China, tops that. So you have lots of people and lots of smart people. What does that mean? You can solve problems. So I think, yes, obviously, there's different context, and when they've got such limited land area as they have per capita, arable land area, unlike Australia, their margin for error for getting things wrong as far as food production is slim. So they have to put a lot of effort in it. But yeah, there's so many things we could learn if we were just willing to have a bit more
But surely in the mind of J.D. Vance, they're just a bunch of peasants and you were going over there to tell them how it's done, Cameron?
Well, I mean, this is just good material for memes, isn't it? Like, how do you, like, when they make comments like that, it's just complete ignorance, complete hubris. And that you can tell, they're in positions of power, but you can tell they're not serious people. I guess maybe it might resonate with their core voters or whatever, but it's obviously not going to resonate in fixing problems or with the rest of the world. And actually, it's joke material, really, isn't it? Like,
In the comments, Julia says, "Preach, Trevor." What do you mean, Julia? What do you mean, preach? I'm a bit worried about. Is that a negative one, or what do you mean by that, Julia? But anyway, make a comment, and I'll try and figure that one out. But
so old Noisy's talking about the poster on my wall. It's not a geological poster; it's the Australian soil classification. So close.
Right. Okay. There you go. Just so you can turn around and refer to it. So, yeah. So just before we leave the soil thing then, like I take it that you learned as much from them as they learned from you. Was it an exchange of information two-way or were you there for other, how was it supposed to work?
Yeah, well, I mean, we went to a couple of universities, 2 universities. We, met with the students and some of the staff, had some tours. So, I mean, we didn't get into technical details of that, but it's interesting, a different approach to the world. And it's funny, like their English varied. The English is the language they use for a lot of their papers, like and that. But they, because of the areas we went to, there's not a lot of English-speaking people actually visit. So I think it was a good opportunity for them to actually practice their English. But so communications, there's some challenges there, and my ability to learn Chinese is about zero. I started with 1 word and I think I finished with 2. But the conversation we had over and they treat us like kings. We were very well treated and respectfully treated. But what sort of just general chit chat is they have exactly the same problems as what we have. As in, what are they worried about? How much it costs to buy a house? Except they save for a house before they buy it, whereas we go into debt and buy a house. But it's they have exactly the same sort of concerns. And what's China about, in my view? It's about trying to fix China's, not fix China's problems, to develop China so it can, address its challenges and raise the standard of living for its people. And I mean, isn't that the purpose of government? Isn't that what the purpose of it all? It's all about, is to make people's lives better.
And putting a whole lot of troops on a ship and sending them over to Australia to invade, to start taking stuff, is pretty low on the order of priorities.
Especially when you can just put some money in a bank account and transfer it somewhere. It doesn't really stand up to much scrutiny, I don't think.
Yeah, do it the easy way. So let's talk some policies then.
Yep.
So on your Twitter feed, you gave 4 reasons why you're running. The first one was the power to declare war. So what's the Australia's Voice policy on that?
Yeah, so pretty clear. The Australian Voice policy is that the Parliament should make the decision to go to war. So, I mean, and that's one of when I was sort of discussing my potential candidacy with Senator Payman, and she asked me for 3 things, 3 things I'd like to happen. That was number 1 on my list. And she straight away said, yep, we agree with that. So, yeah. And I mean, we take it for granted because we're not at war, but where we are in the world with the United States and where it is, China's rising, United States getting desperate. This is not an abstract thing in my view. We're actually in a position where, the United States gets desperate enough. They'll create a reason. So it'll be Taiwan or Chinese aggression or something. There'll be some reason, but you just have to scrape away the surface, and we'll know it'll be the United States in an effort to try and resurrect its position in the world, could trigger a conflict with China, and Australia, based on AUKUS, the Forced Posture Agreement, that will be drawn into that. And the only safeguard we have to prevent us being dragged into a war with China, the source of our prosperity, is that the Parliament has the power to say no. So that's, I put that as almost an existential issue. So I'm more worried about the state of our soil, the state of our environment in the big picture for our future than I am about conflict. But if we get dragged into a conflict like that, all that's irrelevant. So we need, we need the capacity for the parliament to nip that in the bud before we, end up goodness knows where.
If you can't get a majority decision in the parliament, then you just shouldn't be going to war. And it's not like it's necessarily so super urgent. So our entry into Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, we had all the time in the world to convene parliament and vote about it. But instead, we just get the Prime Minister and not even the full cabinet, just a handful of his closest advisors, sitting around going, yeah, I think we should do this, and committing us to these things. So,
and that's the thing, if it's easy to create excuses, and normally it's about intelligence. It's an excuse, not a reason. I'm saying from what's our principle. We're a democracy, therefore this decision, which can send us off into a totally different trajectory of our future, including an existential risk. So that's the principle, is that the parliament should decide that, not just the executive. But if you look through history, from or any of the conflicts Australia's been involved in, for us to actually go to war, it takes months of preparation. So time is not an issue.
Yep.
And actually time, the longer it takes, the better, because it's easy in the heat of the moment, easier in the heat of the moment. People, rush of blood, alpha male, chest beating, political opportunism. It's much easier in that short term to say, yes, we're going to do it. But once you're committed, we had the inquiry into overseas armed conflict, and they put a few pathetic little, additional requirements of having to report back to the parliament that last year. But, they missed the point. Nothing's really changed. It's just window dressing. Because once you've made that decision, once you've engaged in war, too late. It's too late. So you need to make sure that decision. I'm not saying we shouldn't go to war. There might be reasons when we could. I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But you don't cross that line until you've got all your I's dotted, your T's crossed, and you're doing it for a very good reason.
It should not be easy. It shouldn't just be a Prime Minister's decision. Even we don't have nuclear weapons here. A friend of mine, Cameron Riley, has this joking hypothesis or theory about America with launching nuclear weapons in anger against another country, that the president shouldn't be able to do that so easily. And in fact, the key to pressing the button should be surgically implanted into the vice president. And if the president wants to launch nuclear weapons, he's got to work with a team and carve into the chest of the vice president to pull out the key to fire the nuclear weapons, on the basis that if he's not prepared to do that, because it's an ugly thing to do, then he shouldn't be sending a nuclear weapon off. So
even better, do it for his kids.
Yes. So I'm not suggesting that as a policy for Australia's voice, but the concept is there that it should be. You've got to recognise what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, every time we've gone to war, why have we done it? It hasn't been for our defence. It's been for our alliance.
Yes.
So that is why we've gone. And Clinton Fernandez in his book Sub-Imperial Power. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I think
got it right here. Yeah. Sub-Imperial Power.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I have read that.
It's only a small one, but it's a great little book. But he said they knew when we went to the Iraq War that it would increase the risk of domestic terrorism in Australia, but they took the decision anyway because the alliance was more important than the domestic terrorism threat.
Yeah.
So for the sake of alliance, which is really a mafia protection rate, we increase the terrorist threat in Australia. What sort of decision making is that? That's I have no words for how evil I think that sort of decision making is.
The people behind this should be shamed afterwards that they're still lauded. But anyway, okay. Next policy, AUKUS.
Sorry. Can I just talk on the nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
So we don't have. But you remember that Penny Wong, our current foreign minister, said we have a neither confirm nor deny policy as far as what the United States military aircraft or ships have when they come to Australian territory. Right. So via the Forced Posture Agreement, which was signed by or started with the Gillard government and then signed in by the Liberal government in 2014. So both parties are like this. They're one and the same. that gives the United States the ability to occupy areas of Australian soil where we have no control over that, including when they fly aircraft in, that they may or may not have military weapons, nuclear weapons on them, and we have no recourse or capacity to check or prevent that from occurring. Now, if you think, and real-time example of what's happened here. So the Nautilus Institute did a report based on all the information they could gather, and some of the bombing by B-2 bombers that left the United States involved B-2 bombers flying over Australian airspace, those B-2 bombers being refueled via US Air Force refueling tankers that flew out of Cairns Airport, flying to Yemen, dropping bombs on Yemen, which is in violation of the UN Charter, and then flying back through Australian airspace.
Really,
So,
we refueled some of the planes.
We didn't refuel them, but US
on our
Air
shore
Force
they did it.
assets on our shore did. So
Yep.
we're complicit in a crime. We're complicit in that. Now we switch targets to China, and the United States obviously the only country in the world that's actually used nuclear weapons. If it gets that, given the sort of fanatical, exceptionalism bent they have in the United States, if the United States gets in a position where they see no other option to try and rescue their empire, I don't think it's unforeseeable that they could use nuclear weapons. My goodness, I hope not. But they could very well do that through Australian facilities and airspace, because then it's not coming from mainland United States, and the Chinese have the capacity to respond in kind. So RAF-based Amberley, RAF-based Townsville, some of our port facilities, they could become targets in an exchange of missiles and worst case even nuclear weapons if it got to that point. So I mean, we're talking about not just life and death of individuals, life and death of countries and potentially the whole planet, all because we're unwilling to stand up for ourselves and say we're an independent sovereign country and we're not going to let you use our territory for hosting your foreign military bases, and you're certainly not bringing nuclear weapons here.
And up to this point, establishment has said, well, the Americans are the responsible good guys of the planet. We've now reached the point that they're irresponsible and they're not good guys. It's clear to everybody.
It is, but this is good. We're actually in a relatively good spot here because, like I've been saying, and I'm not the only one, you're obviously saying it too, Trevor, and that, but saying the same thing about the United States for time, and people are just poo-pooing it. But now, and I think we should thank Donald Trump for this, now everyone can see, the mask has been ripped off. Everyone can see the true nature of the United States, unless they're blinded and funded by the United States in some way to help.
They can, Cameron, but they're not. They're not. It's been obvious for quite a while now, and they're not backing off. And even something. This is where I find Gaza just so depressing, like a modern day genocide. It's clear to everybody that children, women, obvious civilians are just being slaughtered en masse and also being picked off by snipers. And we know it's happening, and yet our own government is complicit in it. And that such an event could take place and is being allowed to happen just depresses me. That, yes, it's obvious, but still nothing's happened. How long will it take, I worry. So, yeah.
I know. It's, I agree. Sometimes I wake up and I don't recognise, how did we get to this point as a country where, everything I believed as I was growing up as a young Australian, and when I joined the military, I thought we were the good guys and stuff like that. Where, it might be a bit controversial, but the evidence of, Nazis and neo-Nazis and far-right extremists running the show in Ukraine, we support that. We're supporting a genocide in Gaza. It's like, where did we go wrong as a country? Like, I really struggle to understand, how we got to this point.
I put a lot of the blame on Murdoch. Have you got a Murdoch policy in amongst all this stuff? I couldn't see one in my brief look. But
yes, I don't think we've got a specific one, but
You
That's
need
right.
one. Rustle one up at some stage, because I
Yeah.
blame him for a lot of what's happening here with his ability to manipulate. Even in this day where not many people buy his papers, he still has an influence on the system that's way out of kilter. So, okay, one of the other reasons for you doing the Senate run was AUKUS.
Yep.
And what's the policy on AUKUS for Australia's voice?
So the policy is to basically scrap AUKUS. So I mean, it's, we haven't got much meat on the. We're a new party, so we're still developing the policies, but that's the heart of it. There's a couple of different parts to AUKUS. The shiny part, which grabs everyone's attention, is the submarines, and then the other part is the increased access to US military forces, so they can project force targeted at China. So I sort of covered that before when we were talking about the US B-2 bombers and stuff like that. But I mean, I forget all the logic, strategic logic or illogic, reasons why we have AUKUS. Just from a risk, business, project management perspective, it's a dud.
Yep.
We know that the UK and the United States does not have the industrial capacity to build these submarines. Yet we're, $800 million down payment just a few months ago that we've made. In what environment would you continue on a project or a program like that when you know that the people you've contracted to deliver it can't deliver it? So because that, and I can't see how that's going to change. Like, there's going to take years, if not decades, to build the capacity, because it's a workforce. Like, you increase your number of engineers and scientists and technicians and all that to actually build these. That's not going to happen next year or 2 years' time. That's 5, 10, 15-year project to do that. So nothing's going to change in that regard. So I think it's going to all fall apart and collapse sooner or later.
We've reached the point where even the hawks, the people in the military and government who want large, shiny military objects and weapons, recognise they're not going to get them with this. So guys like Greg Sheridan and commentators like that have now turned around and have questioned AUKUS because they want weapons and they can just see that they're just not going to arrive through the system.
That's right. So, but we just need to, I think it's pretty fragile. There's got to be some pressure point we can push, which the whole thing will implode. So I guess that's, hopefully what we can do is help, apply that pressure and the whole thing will implode. And the other thing that worries me too is like, in my profession as a soil scientist, we've had a period where, state governments in particular used to employ soil scientists, and they've sort of, in most states and territories, pulled back significantly. So we're at this point now in my soil scientists where our workforce is getting smaller and smaller, and a large proportion of the workforce is sort of getting close to retirement age. So to rebuild that's going to take 10 or 20 years. And being in the army and seeing how workforce development, how difficult it is to maintain trades and that's a big project. But with AUKUS, and this is just one sort of specialisation, one field. But you think with AUKUS to actually get the workforce, all those engineers, science, technicians, maintenance, logistics people that we could actually, maintain this capacity, it's going to suck so much out of other areas of the economy that, you want to get a plumber or an electrician, good luck. They're all getting twice as much working for the bloody, submarine program. So it's going to have massive opportunity costs and flow on second, third order costs on the entire economy. In our, bells and shiny whistles, we can, pat ourselves and we've got some nuclear submarines in 30 years' time or something like that. It's just
our Navy cannot operate and man the measly few ships it's got at the moment.
Yeah, I think we've got one operational Collins class at the moment.
Yeah. And a family friend of mine has been in the Navy for out of school. I think he's been in it 3 years or something now. And the only time he's really been on a ship was one of the old sailing vessels, like a replica of the Endeavour type thing on some sort of promotional cruise up and down the coast. But just finding crew to operate these submarines would be enormously difficult because who wants to do that? It would
No,
not be an
I
easy job to fill.
I mean, they get well paid, submariners. They get the base wage plus I can't remember, but yeah, it's a fairly significant bonus. And I think then when they go to sea, they get paid even more. So seagoing allowance. So we can't do that now. And I think I think people aren't really that keen to sign up to sort of go and fight wars, which so I think recruitment is going to be a massive issue for the Australian Defence Force, not just for the Navy, but going forward. And I think that a lot of it comes back to we've lost the plot a bit as to what's the purpose of the Defence Force. Like, to me, I think I think we need a Defence Force. In a lot of ways, I think it's a noble profession when you're there defending your country. But when we do what we do, which is not defend our country, but paying a down payment on an alliance just in case they might come and help us one day if we need it, but are unlikely to do so. Like, it's not a particularly attractive deal.
Yeah. Okay. Also, in your Twitter, as your number 3 and 4, we've kind of covered these really. Middle East policies and then the American imperial system's imploding and our leaders are failing to deal with this new reality. So that was your sort of reasons for getting involved. Were there any specific policies of Australia voiced towards the Middle East? And I guess as the recognition of Palestine would be one.
Yeah, that's right. And we're unequivocal. It's a genocide, and Fatima, Senator Payman and Senator Thorpe have got I can't remember the exact title of the bill, but there's a 3-part bill there, which is reducing the risk of Australia being complicit in genocide. So that's directly related to to what's happening in the Middle East. And I guess the major, obviously cost of living is a theme in the election, and we hear it all the time in the media and stuff like that. So we have, I guess, one of the key policies is lifting the minimum tax threshold up to the minimum wage, based on the sort of premise that the minimum wage is what you need to survive. So we shouldn't be taxing you on that amount, because obviously that puts you on the back foot. And I think the costings come out at less than what the cost of AUKUS is. So,
Right.
we can keep people out of poverty, or we can buy submarines.
Cancel the submarines and we can lift the threshold. Yeah.
Yep. And the other also relates to that is for is for small businesses to lift the threshold as well, so that businesses with a turnover of less than $5 million, small businesses with a turnover of less than $5 million don't pay tax, and also try to pay, get the corporates, the big corporates who seem to make a mozza in Australia but don't pay a lot of tax, get them to start paying their way.
Yep. How? Anyway.
How? Well, that's the policy position. I'm not an economics expert, so I don't think I'll delve into how we do that. But I guess one thing that differentiates between the Greens and the Australia's First is that, from my understanding, the Greens like to sort of do things on their own and sort of take credit things, whereas we're more than willing to collaborate with any other political party who support policies that we support, to help further those things along. And I guess, Plato, I think, had a quote something about the oldest and most fatal ailment for any republic, or democracy in our case, is inequality. And we're becoming more and more unequal as a society. And that concentration of wealth is part of the reason why we're heading the sort of way we're heading. Obviously, we're talking serious disruption to the current power structure, but if we don't fix that, we're heading down this sort of path where the United States is heading. We have an extremely small percentage of the population extremely wealthy, and a large percentage who, I think in the US, the average sort of median wage really hasn't improved for decades. Like, that's where we'll end up heading, and that's not good for Australians and not good for our democracy. And so we need to fix that. So, hopefully Australia's Voice can play a role in sort of addressing those sort of fairly fundamental issues that we face.
Yep. I'm just looking at the website now, and I'm just going to rattle through some of the policies and to give people an idea. stop me if you want to talk about any in particular. But so housing, what they're saying is that limit negative gearing and reduce the CGT discount from 50% to 25%, lowering it by 5% each year. So a phased reduction in the capital gains tax discount. So that's one of the policies. Bank reform. 4 banks have been gouging customers. We will push for a public Bank of Australia. So
yeah, I think that's critical. But I think working in with the post office as well, keep making viable for regional post office. A lot of those struggling, seeing many regional areas losing banks around the country.
yeah,
And access to banking services is obviously a prerequisite for people's daily lives, for small business, etc. So I think we saw, was it in the Great Depression, where after the Great Depression they had the divestiture of investment banking and everyday banking. What was it?
yes,
Class D? Was that the?
yes,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah. And they did that for a reason. I guess that's sort of part of this. If we could have a public bank which is focused on providing everyday banking services for average people, small businesses, and that would have forced more competition on the banks, whilst also ensuring that Australians had access to the banking services that we all need.
yeah, yep, that's a good one. Supermarket divestiture. Coles and Woolworths break up the duopoly. So
I think there's a bit of nuance to that. I can't talk to it in any detail, but it's and I think I saw it. Was it one of the institutes did a study in their in the specials, and you line them up, and the one week that Coles has a special, Woolies doesn't, and then vice versa.
Yep.
So I think it's more about if those practices don't stop, if they don't do the right thing, then take that sort of action. So obviously, cost of living, food is at the core of being able to look after people. So that's what that's about.
Yep. A republic, in favour of that.
Me too.
Sorry?
Me too.
Yep. And the genocide, of course, we've talked about. And the resource rip-off. I gather that is to get more resource revenue and not give away gas and other things.
Correct. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what I mean. We have, when you look at other countries such as Norway and that, who manage to, use their resources to look after their society, whereas we do it to look after our corporates who, feed the political system. So, there's no reason why Australia should be poor in any way, shape, or form, because we're just so well endowed with natural resources. Other than the way we manage how we look after and sell those.
Yes. Yep. There's a bunch of other ones there. Fixed student HECS debt, national poverty measure, raise job seeker, raise the remote area allowance, real climate action, bunch of others. I'll let people sort of go through those at their leisure if they want to, unless there are any others that you wanted to highlight in particular that you're keen on.
No, I guess just as an example of, this is a new party and we're still developing policies. And I mean, we're running in the Senate, so the Senate's primarily about holding the government to account. That's what I like to do, is hold the government to account, because obviously we won't be in power, but hopefully we'll get a couple of candidates in and come senators and ask the hard questions and expose the untoward things that we're doing. And now I've lost my train of thought. Where was I heading with that? What was I?
I don't know. Whether there are any other policies was what I started off with that you wanted to particularly highlight.
Any other policies? And I guess when it comes to cost of living, and one of the things I think we need to, it's not in the national conversation, but I think needs to be, is I believe that the cost of living isn't a crisis, it's a chronic condition. Mm-hmm. And the reason I believe it's a chronic condition, I mean, there's lots of things we can do, and part of that is like raising the tax threshold and making sure that corporates are paying the tax that they should be paying, etc. So there's lots of things that we can do to assist, but fundamentally we're not going to solve it unless we understand that there's a a professor in the UK that I follow who has this energy cost of energy program where he looks at over time how much energy we're getting out of our energy sources is actually useful to the economy is declining. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you look at Saudi Arabia or even Texas or that back in the 1850s, or whenever it was, they dug a hole and oil comes spurting out of the ground. It takes no energy to actually extract that energy, virtually no energy, extract that energy and then put it to good use. Whereas now you look at the size of the infrastructure that we need to be able to extract energy, whether it's coal, natural gas or oil. It's massive investment, massive infrastructure. So we're actually getting less energy out of it, and it's the same for renewables. They have relatively less energy than you get compared to what we had in times past. So unless we come to terms with these sort of issues, we're always going to have a cost of living as a chronic condition. But we don't even talk about this sort of stuff. Like, these are core issues of the future of our society and civilization. Yep. But we fluff around the Liberal and Labor Party talking about just having pot shots at each other, but quite happy to keep the existing system as is because that's where they get their power from and they're happy with the status quo. But these things, we can't avoid them. So it's better to understand them and then work out how do we actually address them. And I think that's what the minor parties can do, is sort of raise these questions, raise these issues, and sort of, influence policy and decisions. And I believe that can happen. You hear regularly of little things where minor parties have been able to get the major parties to do something or make change decisions. So
was that Steve Keen? Was that the economist?
No, not Steve Keen.
Someone else.
Okay. Surplus. Sorry, it's called Surplus Energy Economics, and it's Dr. Tim Morgan is the guy. But I mean, there's been a lot of literature on energy return on investment and similar topics. I mean, it comes down to physics. It's not about whether you're left or right politically. It comes back to physics. And I'm pretty sure that politics has no influence on physics. So we have to deal with that reality.
Yeah. Do you know, it's really hard to explain economics, finance sort of issues to people. So even something like, the cost of nuclear energy, like you could walk into any pub in Australia and if you wanted to start talking about that, half the bloody pub, well, depending on the demographic, it's probably old guys in a pub, the majority have got no idea of the high cost of generating nuclear power in Australia compared to renewables. It's just bleedingly obvious and well documented. But you can't even get that concept across to people. So when you're trying to explain anything with a bit of nuance to it, like Woodside and other groups are totally ripping us off in terms of the royalties and revenue that we're collecting compared to, say, what Norway's been able to achieve. It's really difficult to convince people of some of the most simple concepts. When you've got someone like the Murdoch empire actively working against you at every stage, it's just a blight. It's just a blight on our system that we can't have proper discussions about policy where we talk about the nuance and the conflicting ideas and concepts and wrap it all up. It's you can't do it in our current environment.
Right. And I mean, I'm a mug at this political game. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just giving it the best shot that I can. But every issue we face has been developed over years or decades to get to the point where it's an issue. You can't fix it with a 30-second, spray on the media or a slogan or something like that. And unless we're willing to, be able to create that space where you can actually debate, think in depth, and we're in big trouble. Yeah. So I'm trying, I'm hopefully in how I'm approaching this, I'm trying to do that in a logical, methodical, unemotional manner. But we've got real deep issues that require real deep thinking, some creative thinking, some hard work, and 3 years. What problems can we actually fix? Are we going to fix a housing issue in 3 years? No. Are we going to obviously there'll be progress and things along the way, but all these problems, if they've taken 20 or 30 years to become an issue, well, they're going to take 10, 20, 30 years for us to resolve them. But our political system is just not well set up to address that.
And our discussion systems are not set up. We don't have systems that allow in-depth thought and context and nuance and the history of issues, the history of our property debacle going back to Howard with the capital gains tax exemption. Yeah. The history of the Middle East sort of issues there, like the Yanks are wanting to start a war with Iran, and you really have to go back to the overthrow of Mossadegh and Kermit Roosevelt and the meddling that we've done in that country that's got us to this position. And even something as basic as we had a deal. They had a deal with Iran about nuclear disarmament, and Trump canned it. And now he's wanting to resurrect a deal. But do any of these reports ever say, oh, by the way, there used to be a deal and Trump canned it? They don't ever give that nuance.
But this is one thing that does give me a bit of hope, is that the rest of the world, the multipolar world, based on old cultures, old civilizations, they are not like this.
Yes.
And I really think that they're, the Russia, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, they're very old cultures. And whether, Johnny come lately, the Westerners and, like a teenage, buck full of, thinks they're invincible. I think they're managing this. They're absorbing, because if half the provocations that the US is doing against, were reversed, like the US would be dropping bombs, missiles left, right and center. They're absorbing a lot. And I think because, they're old cultures, they've seen all this, come and go. Like how many times has Chinese empire expanded, contracted. They've got the maturity to understand how the world works. And I think they're managing the decline. I think by doing that, sooner or later, we in those countries sort of Western aligned and allied to the US, we might just get the hint that we need to change our ways. So I'm quietly confident that they're actually helping us. We just need to open our eyes and see that it's time to do things a little bit differently.
Cameron, that is a positive note to end on. If you were happy to end on that one.
Yeah, that sounds good with me. Yeah.
All right. Well, people can look up the website, see what Australia's Voice is on about. Good luck with your voting. Good luck with everything, Cameron. You're welcome to come on board the podcast and talk about stuff, and we can just agree with each other again, as we tend to do. One day we'll find something to disagree on, but in the meantime, thanks for coming on. Good luck with what you're doing and having a go. So, good luck with how it all pans out.
No worries. Thanks very much, Trevor. Thanks for the chat.
Okay. All right. We'll be back next week with a panel discussion with Joe and myself and Scott. We'll talk to you then, and bye for now.